Hello, my name is Philip Camilla, and today we're going to have a conversation beyond science and religion.
Breaking new ground in thinking, exploring the outer limits of what we know about the world and ourselves, unhindered by common beliefs and perceptions. This is Conversations Beyond Science and Religion, taking on subjects from the Big Bang, the multiverse, and evolution to the supernatural and the new rising consciousness. This is where scientists, philosophers, New Agers, and spiritualists come together to discuss where this world may be heading. Now here's your host, lawyer, philosopher, and the author of The Collapse of Materialism, Philip Camilla.
So Thomas Kuhn, in about the 1950s, wrote one of the most noteworthy science books ever. It was called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and this book really started the notion of a paradigm. And there's a lot in the book, but one of the themes that has been used in the past half century and more that is dominating much of science writing today is the notion of a paradigm, and the notion that when the existing world model or theory fails to account for the full range of human experience, a new paradigm is needed. And there's many folks that are of the opinion that the truth of Thomas Kuhn's conceptualization of this is proving more true with time. One of the problems, in fact, probably the main problem we're having with the current worldview, which is based upon scientific materialism, which we'll be talking about a little bit today, is that it does not account for the full range of human experience, as I said, and does not account for what we call spirituality, parapsychology, consciousness, the placebo effect, and in my humble opinion, it does a bad job of accounting for the physical world as well, as witnessed by many of the oddities coming out of cosmologists and physicists these days, which is another topic. But in my opinion, scientific materialism is seeing its better days. Now, materialism, as we've talked about before in the show, is simply the view that ultimate reality consists of mindless particles and forces powering a world without purpose. Why is this important? Well, it's important, among other things, to have the right worldview. In the same way, it's important to understand the rules to the game or the law by which the universe operates. Imagine playing the game of chess without knowing the rules. You're always going to lose. And I think that's why a lot of people have focused on this topic throughout the years, including the great philosophers of all time, such as Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Kant, Hume, Berkeley, and Descartes, and many others. Since I started the show almost 10 years ago, there's been an increasing trend towards putting the doctrine of scientific materialism under the lens and questioning its assumptions. Through that time, I think, more and more scholars of increasing stature have begun, and in many cases, increased their efforts to expand our current worldview to one that goes beyond materialism and, in fact, goes beyond our current notion of science. And today, I'm very happy to have on the show one of the leaders in this field. His name is Harald Walach. He is a professor at the Poznan Medical University in Poland, where he teaches mindfulness to the international medical students. He's also a visiting professor at the University of Witten Herdeck's psychology department in Germany, where he teaches philosophical foundations of psychology. He's the founding director of the Change Health Institute in Berlin. He has a double Ph.D. in clinical psychology and history and theory of science. Author of more than 170 peer-reviewed papers, 14 books, and more than 100 book chapters. His newest work, which he did for the Galileo Commission, is called Beyond a Materialistic Worldview Toward an Expanded Science. Harald, thank you for being with us, and sorry if I mispronounced some of the names here. My German is pretty bad. So welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
That's okay. Thank you, Philip, for inviting me. Hello, everybody.
And so, leaving aside the fact we had a little technical difficulty, I'm very happy to have you here. And I think that those of us in the U.S. may not know a lot about the Galileo Commission. So let's start off with, what is the Galileo Commission?
It is a group of scientists that has been brought together by the Scientific and Medical Network in the UK, which is a group that started with doctors and scientists that tried to develop an alternative view around science. And the Galileo Commission is just a group of high-profile scientists that support the Scientific and Medical Network in that, and they have commissioned me to write this report.
Okay, so what is the driver for the need for this commission? What is your personal motivation for getting involved in something like this?
Well, as you said, I think there is an increasing number of scientists in actually all around the world that are dissatisfied with the current, I would call it, mainstream paradigm that is operative in science, which is predicated on materialism as a worldview and pure empiricism as the way how we look at the world, and which has actually quite some problems. And so because that is problematic in the view of many scientists, they have started to bring this group together and wanted me to write a report to succinctly just describe it and maybe develop an alternative view. And that's what I've done.
Okay, so even though we talk a lot about materialism on this show, why don't you give your own definition for the listener, Professor, so that we have a common concept to discuss here? How would you define, let's call it scientific materialism, to distinguish it from the economic version for a moment?
Well, yeah, I think it is very important to distinguish two types of science, or two notions of science. There is one notion of science that is common to everybody, which is the attempt to understand the world by using good methodology and making sure we don't make mistakes. That's what I would call a operational definition of science. That is what scientists do in order to get results. Underlying this is very often, but not necessarily so, a worldview which comes out of the way how many scientists operated. And that worldview, as scientific materialism, is the worldview that matter, material entities or material stuff, is the only thing that is real in the world, and that we can understand everything else, such as consciousness, such as values, such as goals, out of the working of these material entities and how they cooperate and how they come together. This is actually a philosophical worldview that has been around for quite some time. The Greek atomists, that's what they are called, they were the first to use that. Then it has been sitting around in the history of science for a long time and has come to prominence only comparatively recently. It is a worldview that is very intriguing because it seems to bring everything together at a very simple level, and that is what is also making people believe it might be a good thing to look at the world in this way. But it is also very narrowing because it, as you already said in the beginning, it operates only by leaving a lot of stuff out of that very worldview. And maybe it's important to also note the following thing. We cannot possibly do anything, including science, without making assumptions. And these assumptions cannot be proven or made plausible by the very system we are using. And that is a very strange structure, which is also true for science. So science has to make some assumptions. For instance, there is only matter that is real in the world, or the developmental process that comes about through evolution is all we need to understand the world. These are assumptions that are being made. And out of those assumptions comes the worldview of scientific materialism. And as I said initially, it's very important to distinguish the worldview from the process of science.
Okay, so I want to dig on that point a little deeper, but first of all, let's just answer the big question, which is that is this really just an academic exercise, or why should the person on the street care about this?
Well, I think the person on the street does not necessarily have to care about that, but science has to care about that. And science is very important in that it forms all the narratives, the stories, the belief systems that infuse our culture. And in that sense, the person on the street should care about it, because it is actually what drives and structures our world.
Yeah, and I think that's good. Now, I would go a little farther. I mean, there's so many levels to this, because looking at it from simply the scientific perspective, and you have read a lot of science books, more than I have, I'm sure. But I have read a lot of science books. I have a philosophy degree. This has been a topic of mine, a subject of interest of mine for a long time. I won't date myself. A long time, and I have this ideal vision of science that is really maybe wrapped into the concept of a theory of everything. This unified theory, the thing that frustrated Einstein at the end of his career, where he was looking for a theory to explain everything, and we hear from some of the science writers that that's ultimately the goal of science. I think that Leon Letterman, in his book The God Particle, says something about the goal is to summarize science so the equation could be put on a T-shirt. One equation, one principle. And so from the scientific standpoint, the frustrating thing is that it is so obvious that there are phenomena that the current scientific theory doesn't explain. So that's right off the bat. If you're a scientist to me, and you have a theory that does not account for things like near-death experiences, which is a good one, the whole field of parapsychology, the whole issue of alternate medical cures, if it doesn't account for things that we know occur, then there's something wrong with the theory. So right off the bat, I think that's a real problem. And I think that your book here, and I'd recommend this book, by the way, folks, is not really easy to get. I think you have to search for it. It's called Beyond a Materialistic Worldview. And the thing about this, it's sort of like a study guide, where it's short, it's only 100 pages or so, but it really summarizes all these things. And it's focused on the gaps in scientific theory, and you really do a good job of getting to the core problem of these assumptions. But is that really what's driving you here, Harald, which is our current scientific theory is incomplete?
That's my major motivation. I think science has to be always true to what we experience, to the phenomena as it is normally called. Yeah. And if you have a scientific model that by default has to exclude certain phenomena from its theory and from its remit, then something is wrong, as you said. And to me, that is pretty obvious that this is the case. And there are probably two different types of, there are many different types of people, but there are two generic type of people. Some that stick to that belief system and leave out everything that doesn't fit with the belief system and say, well, that's irrelevant, or we don't care about that, or we deal with that later, or we don't think it's even there. And there are other people who look first to the phenomena and to what we experience, and then to what the scientific model can make out of that. And to me, this is the more important approach, because if important phenomena that people experience that are obviously there cannot be fit into a theoretical model, then we have to change the model. And that is what what you mentioned initially. That's the case when paradigms become stuck. Then they have to be changed. And that is a very complicated process, because it's not just about a new experiment or adding something to a theory. It's about a fundamentally different way of looking at things. And by the way, that report is actually easy to get. You just have to put in Galileo Commission /report, and then you can download it for free.
Oh, really? Download it for free? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a hard copy of it, so it's definitely worth having. It's definitely worth having the hard copy.
And the hard copy is not very expensive either.
Yeah. I mean, it's as I said. What I like about it is that it's like a magazine. Really, it's like a magazine, and it's got a lot of great references to it, and it summarizes the principles at hand very well in a very how can I put this, educational manner. Now, the other aspect here that is really important, I think, is how much scientific materialism influences culture in general.
Yeah.
For example, and I'm going to give you one example and let you comment it. In the U.S., we have an incredible dichotomy between the respect given the orthodox client scientific shows like Neil deGrasse show on Cosmos, anything that Stephen Hawking did, the late Stephen Hawking, anything regarding the orthodox science and how much respect is given that. And then we have these sort of oddball ghost hunting shows or mediumship shows, which are sort of, even the folks that watch them, I think, understand that it's sort of got a lot of quackery to it. And so it's really amazing how much the differences between the honor and respect given the orthodox science versus the oddball, the paranormal shows. I don't know if it's as bad in Europe as it is here, but it's really a sharp distinction here. How is that in Europe? Is it the same, or is it?
It's difficult for me to say because I'm not watching TV, so I don't know what is being because I don't know what is being produced there. But what is certainly true is that there is a strong cleavage or a strong gap between orthodox scientific views about the world and what normal people experience and think about it. And so it's almost as if you are an intellectual or if you're a scientifically educated person, you better shut up in public about certain things, else you're not being taken seriously, or you're not seen as someone who has actually understood the world properly. And so I think it's the same is true for Europe as well, that the scientific worldview has kind of conquered the public sphere in a way that journalists in normal newspapers or in magazines are all, I would say, brainwashed in that way, that they cannot touch on those topics that don't fit into that worldview. So I experience that in the same way. So what happens is this whole thing emigrates, as it were, into a subculture, into the web or into groups where it's not being handled responsibly anymore. And that is exactly what bothers me, and why I think we need to bring those topics back into the remit of science, so that there is a responsible and open dealing with, say, spiritual experiences or parapsychological experiences, or you name it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting phenomena that really deserves a lot of attention, which is in daily life. If you and there are polls on this in the U.S. and I think worldwide. If you took a poll of the number of people who believe in some kind of parapsychology whether it's synchronicity or the placebo effect or precognitive dreams, remote viewing, near death, whatever, the vast majority of people believe that there's truth to them, the normal people on the street, because everybody's had some oddball thing. A lot, maybe the death of a loved one, sort of a feeling in your gut when something bad happens to someone you're close to. Synchronicities are just so cool when they happen, and they're so bizarre, those oddball coincidences. But then these same people sort of bow down to orthodox science, which basically says that those events cannot be true.
Yeah.
So we really have a sort of a conflict here, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think we need a paradigm shift, because it may help us think a little clearer. It may open our mind instead of hiding part of our experiences or feeling like we have to be off our rocker to think that some of these things are true.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's exactly the point. I mean, we did a representative survey of German psychotherapists a couple of years ago. That was a Ph.D. Work of one of my Ph.D. students. About 900 psychotherapists really representatively sampled, and we asked them about their beliefs in, say, supernatural things like religious beliefs or so, and we asked them about spiritual experiences. And there is only a third of these psychotherapists, and they all go through university training, that say they do not believe in anything beyond material reality. And it's also a third that says we did not have a spiritual experience. 2/3 actually report spiritual experiences, and 2/3 believe in some sort of say transcendent or non-material reality. And that is quite stunning, because these are not just normal people. They are normal people as well, but they are people who have gone through the university system. And the same is actually true for normal scientists. Normally, it's not quite the same percentage. It's a little bit lower, but a large group of these people are similar. And it's only through the distillation process in academia that there are top scientists who do not believe that, and they make their PhD students conform to that view, that this so-called scientific worldview is being streamlined and mainstreamed. But it is not the majority opinion, nor is it, in my view, true to reality in a larger sense.
Yeah. I don't know if you read Scientific American, but there was an article written, and it was probably about 5 years ago now, by Michael Shermer. And Michael Shermer is the skeptic of all things unusual.
I know, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he accounts in his column, and I don't know if you heard this, because an account of this is actually in Dean Radin's new book called Real Magic, and I had done a blog on it, or I forget where. I could have put it in my book, actually, if I remember correctly. But in any event, Michael Shermer tells a story about this wedding, his wedding night, where
I know the story.
That story, it's such an amazing story, where this old radio comes on during their wedding night and starts playing this romantic tune from their past. The radio never worked before, and he's like struck by this event. And then I guess the next day the radio stopped working, and his column was it was sort of a honest, heartfelt column. And then in reading Dean Radin's new book, apparently Michael Shermer is back to his old skeptical ways now, which he even though it influenced him, he still thinks such things are impossible. I don't know. Even if they happen to someone like that, they go back to the culture. And I forget who it was that said that and it could have been in your book where he said the saying is something like, if your job depends upon you're not believing in something, then you don't believe in it. It's something like that.
Yeah, there are a lot of those sayings around.
Yeah, and so it really is maybe a cultural issue that it's influenced, not only the schools but the degrees and your grants and your reputation, and so it permeates the field.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing. That's one thing, but it is also, I think we also have to understand it historically, because science historically was always at the forefront of the Enlightenment movement. And the Enlightenment movement had two major issues or tasks. One was to free humanity from the dogmatism of dogmatic religion. And the other one was the political one, to set people free from feudal bondages, from what kings and feudal lords did to people. And because this is so strong, the freeing of people's minds from dogmatism was a very powerful motive. And that threw out the baby with the bathwater, as it were, because it meant leaving out religion, and leaving out dogmatic religion is the same as leaving out everything to do with spirituality and paranormal experiences. And that I think is the big mistake, because one thing is the dogmatism, meaning the ideas, the theories around it, and the other thing is the human experience. I think you can have a human spiritual experience, for instance, of unity with the world or with other people or with animals or whatnot, but you need not necessarily subscribe to a certain religious dogma in order to make sense of that. And that is, I think, the problem, that with that Enlightenment thrust, science has thrown out everything, and that is at the back of this strong refusal of scientific materialism to even look at these ideas.
Yeah, and I think that Darwinianism is, to me, the classic example where Darwin was really a rejection of religious dogma, and he came up with a quote unquote scientific way to explain, I guess, the development of life. I don't want to say the origin of life, the development of life.
Yeah.
And as opposed to the I guess the supposition that Noah's Ark was lowered down from the sky. So Darwin is still popular because he is viewed as being sort of the counterpoint, the logical, rational counterpoint to the Bible. And it's amazing to me that those who are, this is off topic a little bit, but those who are still hardcore Darwinians are still reacting against biblical dogma or religious dogma, as opposed to maybe considering other approaches to evolution. And there's been a number of great books out recently questioning Darwin and the whole evolutionary concept that he put forward, or at least the theory of Darwinian evolution. But the point is that a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of what we see in favor of materialism is still a reaction against religious dogma, I think.
Yes, that's very true. And I think especially in the context of the United States, it's also sometimes fundamentalist religious dogma, one should say, because, for instance, within Catholicism, there is no doubt about the reality of evolution, and there is no contradiction between religion and revolution at all. If you have a more enlightened or a more informed way of looking at religious teaching, but there are certain fundamentalist groups that really believe to the letter of the Bible that that this is how the world was created. And I think that's one of the problems, that there is actually a fight between bad theology on the one side and bad science on the other side, and everybody plays along as if these were the only possible stances in that discussion, and they are certainly not, because there are very enlightened ways of looking at evolution as a natural process that still needs some explanation. For instance, who started or what started that whole process, or can it all be explained by pure random accidents and randomness or not? That's another question, I think, which needs to be discussed. So I don't think there is actually a contradiction between believing in evolution or thinking evolutionary theory is a good theory and being spiritual or religious. Both is possible, but we need more enlightened ways of thinking about these things. And these oppositions between evolution on the one side and religious dogma on the other side are actually false oppositions. They are not really proper ways of thinking about things.
Yeah, and that's just one example. And of course, the whole topic of Darwinian evolution is a big one that we're not going to have time to get into. I have been reading a lot recently on Darwin and his theory, and of course, over time, there's been a number of fantastic books critiquing the theory. But let me switch to something here that I want to make sure I ask you, and that is, what do you think science is going to look like, say, 25 to 50 years from now? I mean, where would you like to see it go?
I think the most important thing about how science needs to develop is taking consciousness seriously as something that cannot be derived from material entities alone. I think consciousness needs to be seen as, say, co-primary to matter at the very least. And if that is done, then we will also need a science of consciousness, which is already in the making, and we need a methodology of consciousness, which is something which I envision in the future. So that would mean a methodology of true introspection, not just, uninformed introspection, but making sense of your inner experiences. For instance, when you have a really well-developed way of steering your consciousness, you may be able to discover inner structures of the world, say values or purpose or mathematical structures. That is, by the way, how I think good scientists arrive at their theories. And that, I think, is the next step that is needed within scientific development.
Yeah, and of all the top 10 biggest flaws of materialism, of scientific materialism, one of the top 10 would be I'm going to call it wild speculation about how consciousness arose out of dead matter. I mean, that is right up there with the Big Bang and the laws of nature. I mean, I think in your report here, Beyond Materialistic Worldview, and I think in your writing, you talk about the hard problem of consciousness, David Chalmers, and the whole question.
Chalmers brought that up, yeah.
Right. The whole question, folks, and this is a big one. I mean, you could just, to me, I'm a lawyer, but I say that law is glorified common sense. And I also think that science is also glorified common sense, because you could sit back and say, okay, look at the dirt on the ground, even look at the gray matter that's supposedly in our heads. How is it something called consciousness, awareness, subjective feelings? How is that going to come out of this dust? And that to me is more than a hard problem. I think it's an insolvable problem. And so I would agree that consciousness is the big one. And I'm of the mind that science has it upside down. I think the consciousness comes first. I think Descartes was right when he said that mind is the thing we know the most of, or the best. and I'm a consciousness first person. So to me, it's very easy to look at things from the other perspective. So, and also the one thing that you do very well that is also forgotten about is and you mentioned it, but this whole concept of assumptions. And, how, in philosophy, it's called naive realism. That's it's sort of thinking that the world is as it appears. The world looks like it's a machine. Therefore, the conclusion is that it's a machine made of tiny parts. So
I think,
go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting you.
Okay.
I think the point is we bring to the world the view that it is a machine, and that's why we see it as a machine.
Yeah,
but if we look at it differently, we will see different things. I think that's very important.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. And, most folks go back to Newton for this and the whole question about the whole issue of, he looks at a regular operating world and he applies laws. The laws work, and therefore maybe you could explain the entire universe as the interplay of particles and forces. And that's sort of what we're still doing now. Yeah. Right. I mean, and we talked about this whole thing about parapsychology. There's a passage that I use all the time in Steven Weinberg's book, The Dreams of a Final Theory, where he basically says, well, telepathy can't work because we don't see any particles being exchanged between different brains. Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. There are no particles being exchanged between brains, so therefore it must be something other than a particle. So exactly. So it really is amazing. So I think we have come to the end, and it's gone by very quickly here. And I'm going to give you a chance to say a couple things about anything you'd like to say, but also about how to get in touch with your work. But I want to really emphasize to the listener that you should really look up the Galileo Commission. I would say it's got to be one of the leading organizations in the world on this post-materialistic worldview. And again, many folks have sort of bet their careers that there will be a new worldview and that this is where things are heading. And if you really want to see scholarship, this is a good place to start. So Harald, why don't you give some final comments, thoughts, or something you'd like to tell the listener about yourself or the Galileo Commission or anything we've talked about? Yeah, well, I think one thing that is very important about the whole thing is we cannot but look at the world according to certain frameworks and models. Currently, we are using the Newtonian model. We are looking at the world as a machine. We are even looking at ourselves as machines. And if we change that view, we will also see different things. And the way how to change these views is to constantly demolish the dogmas that we are setting up within ourselves by training, by what we get from our culture. And the way to do that is just a regular practice of what I call a culture of consciousness, sitting down and meditating half an hour each day. Similar to how we go to the bathroom half an hour each day for cleaning our hands, washing ourselves, showering, and so forth. I think we should be taking the same time and the same effort to also cleaning our minds. And then we will be able to see different things, and we will be able to have a different experience of the world, and suddenly the worldview will also change. I think that's the most important thing. Yeah, I think that not only, in my own opinion, not only is this an intellectual endeavor, it's also an emotional endeavor. Exactly. Mm-hmm. In that we're not just myself, so just speak for myself, this is not just something that is sort of a mind bender or a intellectual endeavor. It is ultimately a way to live a fuller life and to open your mind not only to the possibilities of life, but the possibilities of the future. And so it really has a therapeutic effect. And I think that's a health effect, a mindfulness effect. And that's, I think, the power of this way of thinking. This is Philip Camella. This is Conversations Beyond Science and Religion. Harald, thank you very much for your time. Get his book from the Galileo Commission. The book, again, is Beyond a Materialistic Worldview Towards an Expanded Science. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
See you.
You've been listening to Conversations Beyond Science and Religion, hosted by Philip Camella. To find out more about Philip and his book, The Collapse of Materialism, visit thecollapseofmaterialism.com.